Hello and welcome to On Boards, a deep look at driving business success. Hi, my name is Joe Ayoub, and I'm here with my co-host Raza Shaikh. Hey Raza.
Hi Joe. Happy to be here with you co-hosting.
Good to be with you. On Boards is about boards of directors and advisors and all aspects of board governance. Twice a month in 20 minutes, this is the place to learn about one of the most critically important aspects of any company or organization, its board of directors or advisors.
Joe and I speak with a wide range of guests and talk about what makes great boards great, what makes a board successful or unsuccessful, how to be a good board member, and how to make your board one of your most valuable assets for your company.
Our guest today comes with a deep and extensive board experience, both as a board member and as an advisor to hundreds of companies.
He is the CEO of Neptune Advisors, which helps middle market companies position themselves for strategic growth, and he is also the CEO of C-Level Community, a membership-based platform that connects middle market leaders.
We're very excited to have Larry Siff as our guest today. Welcome, Larry. It is great to have you with us as our guest on Boards.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Tell us a little bit about the type of companies that Neptune Advisors works with and what you do to help them.
We advise a number of middle market companies ranging from manufacturers, distributors, wholesalers, retailers, low, medium, and high technology companies. So we're very much industry agnostic. The key is that they are middle market and focus on taking their company to the next level of profitable growth.
How long has Neptune Advisors been around?
So Neptune Advisors, we're in our 9th year now. So this next year will be our 10th year, which we're excited about. And then in addition, C-Level Community, we started 3 years ago.
Actually, Larry, that's what I wanted to ask. Tell us about C-Level Community. What led you to start C-Level Community?
What led me to start C-Level Community, again, was the focus on middle market. And what we saw and heard out there from a number of C-level executives being CEOs, CFOs, COOs, there was a gap in the marketplace in terms of getting expertise and knowledge for them at their level for middle market. So we first started that online, which we've continued online, where we have experts every week. Members can ask questions anonymously to the expert. We have surveys every week, and we have blogs specific to the middle market every week. And then right after we started this 3 years ago, we decided to do, as per our members, to do an offline version. So in person, we bring in the top CEOs from around the country. They get interviewed by Harvard Business School professor, one-on-one, 45 minutes. Then we open up to the business audience, 45 minutes. And we've had great CEOs so far. We've had Arnie Sorensen, the CEO of Marriott, Bracken Darrell, the CEO of Logitech. This is just to name a couple of CEOs. Upcoming CEOs that we have is Diane Sullivan, who's the president and CEO of Caleres, used to be called Brown Shoe. They own a number of brand names like Sam Edelman, Alan Edmonds, as well as having retail, which is Famous Footwear. March, we have the president and CEO of Sam Adams Boston Beer coming, Dave Berwick. In end of April, we have Sherry Redstone, who is the chair of Viacom CBS.
I've been to several of your breakfasts. The last one was fantastic.
Aaron Ain was just terrific. Aaron Ain is the chairman, president, CEO of Kronos. He also just recently wrote a book called Work Inspired, and he was inspiring, I got to tell you.
There are times we all go to breakfast or other programs, and they're just boring. This one was every minute that he was talking, people were really focused on what he was saying. He was terrific. He was great.
He sure was. I noticed a number of people taking notes in the room, which is what you always wanted to be doing.
Yeah. So, Larry, I know you served on more boards, nonprofit and for-profit, than just about anyone I know. When did you first serve on a board of directors, and what was it?
It was 1986. It was Boston Aid to the Blind, and I was asked to be on the board by one of the other board members. I had actually done some work with the organization before being on the board.
You must have been pretty young at that time, knowing you for a while.
Yes.
What led you to join a nonprofit board so early in your career?
Well, I always believed, and I learned this very much from my parents, about giving back to the community, that's what really matters. So I was always interested in being involved. I first got involved, Boston Aid the Blind, with one of their clients, this woman who was blind, who literally hadn't been out of her home for a long time. And I ended up taking her out and bringing her to different places, showing her around. And I remember this was probably about 6 or 8 months into it. She looked at me one day and said, "You brought the outside world back to me."
Wow.
And that was unbelievably impactful. And it was a couple months later where one of the board members said, "Would you ever consider being on this board?" And I'm like, "That'd be great."
That's fantastic. Well, one of the ways I know you, Larry, is that we both served on a nonprofit board together, and you were a terrific board member then.
Oh,
so
thank you.
It was great serving with you. What lessons did you learn from that first board experience?
What I learned is first to listen and observe. You're new. You want to watch. You want to learn. You want to look at who participates, who doesn't. And then you want to take notes with questions to follow up with people who've been serving on the board. So that was one of the things. Second thing I would say is impact. Whenever I join, whether it's a nonprofit board or for-profit board, I always look at what can I do to improve the organization and to know what are the critical factors for success. And the third thing is, as I mentioned, I had worked with a blind person through the agency. So I knew what it was like for them to service their own clients firsthand. So now I was sitting on the board, which is a different point of view.
I think having the perspective of working with the client in a mission-based organization is invaluable.
I agree.
Really makes a lot of sense. So since that first experience, approximately how many businesses have you worked with either as a board member or a consultant, advisor?
Well over 350 businesses, over half of whom were family businesses, just since Neptune Advisors was formed. Before that, I was CEO of 7 middle market companies, and I've averaged 6 boards for over 30 years now.
Wow. Very busy. Well, thanks for making the time to be with us today.
Of course, always for you.
What have you observed that helps set the stage for an effective board?
It starts with an actionable business plan. You have to first define where you want the company or the board to be in the future. And I define the future as 5 to 10 years. So you start with that. And then from that, you develop the skill sets that you need for the board. And then you choose the potential board members based upon the skill sets. And the reason I say this is a lot of boards don't do it this way. They'll do it, I know somebody, or I know somebody would be good for the board. But I really think it starts with the future, and that's what drives it. And once you define where you want to take it, you can define the people who can help you get there.
I'm curious, the companies with whom you work, for the most part, when you arrive on the scene, so to speak, do you normally find an actionable, viable business plan, or do you really start working with the plan?
Well, there are some companies who don't have business plans at all. A number of companies who have business plans that are very short-term focused, where we know our plan over the next year, as opposed to 3 or 5 or 10 years. And then the third element, I would say, is business plans that just need to be improved. Often they haven't picked the few that they want to focus on, what they want to win at, and need to prioritize within it. Some will have these huge laundry lists of all these initiatives, but no real strategy, no real strategic plan.
Do you help them develop a business plan if that's one of the things they need to do?
Yes, absolutely.
And how does that cooperation work? And part of what I'm curious about is what's your involvement and to what extent, if any, is the board involved?
Good question. So I think it starts again with, what do you have? What are you starting with? Is there any business plans? There ever been business plans in the past? So get as much homework done. The second thing I think it starts with is you've got to do one-on-one interviews with the CEO, with the senior management, and with the board members. So you've got to get all the background information. And then you need to have an offsite. You typically do it with the senior management, the CEO, and all the managements. And that's when you go through and identify. You start with, okay, where's the company been the past? Where are we today, present, and where do we want the future to be? And you end up just doing a lot of charting on walls, basically, and then trying to pick from there, again, to focus. Where are our priorities? What are we going to win at? How are we going to do it? And then from that 1 to 2 days, however long it takes, you then walk away with, okay, now we've got not only a business plan for the future, but we have the actionable steps we can take. So you go through the who, the what, the when, the whole quarterback, the whole timeline.
So one thing I've seen, and this is both for-profit and not-for-profit, are business plans or strategic plans that a lot of work goes into it and then they go on a shelf, which is, an utter waste of everyone's time. So I'm curious, what do you do to make sure that what you end up with is an actionable plan that people are really going to look at and that's going to really drive the business success?
Right. One of the requirements is after you've done the offsite with the senior management team, and then next you're now presenting and discussing it with the board, which is session 2, you also have to, and this is the key, to have a follow-up session. The follow-up session from that, or from those 2 sessions, has to happen within a 30-day period. It can't be 3 months from now. If you do it 3 months from now, or if you're just going to revisit it a year from now, it's never going to work. Because what will happen is you do it 3 months from now, 2 months and 2 weeks, that's when people will start to say, oh, I have to do some things again. But 30 days is enough time. And in that 30 days, you identify, this is all the priorities we talked about. This is who's going to do it. This is the timeline. Then 30 days from now, when you have that session, you find out what has been completed, what is WIP, what's a work in process. So that's where you really define further, and what do we need to get done. But otherwise, it becomes what you talk about, which is, Joe, they just take it and file it away, and then a year from now, they look at it again, and nothing gets done.
Yeah. Well, how frustrating is that? Just last question on this. How often do you normally, and I know this probably going to change from company to company, but how often would you go back and kind of look at the plan to do a real update?
The business plan itself has to be a workable, livable plan. So you've got to be looking at it, and you look at it, and then you take it and you translate it everywhere. So the people know they have the accountability, they have the quarterback, and then it gets posted, and it's posted. So all the senior management can look at all times where we are as a plan. So by the time you get to a year later, everyone's been working on this plan. They make the revisions. This is an active, livable plan. And then you're going back and saying, okay, this is everything we talked about in the past year that we're going to do. These are all the initiatives. Here's the update on this. This is what we did. What you can do is then start rating it, sort of like what Warren Buffett even did, the 1 to 10 things. How did we do, or A, B, C, D, E, F, whatever we went, how do we do in each of these areas? What could we have done better? And these, I call these the postmortems, are crucial because it will teach you what you can work on for the future to make it even a more viable business plan.
Do you have the board at some point vote on accepting the plan? Is that part of the process or not?
You can or not. I've seen it done many different ways. Some have it where the board is presented the plan but discusses it extensively, questions and everything, and they accept it. Some have formal votes. Well, let's make a formal vote. You could do it either way.
So the important part is to make sure the board understands it, has had an opportunity to ask questions, gives their input. Whether they vote or not, maybe not so critical.
Correct. That's the way I see it. But everyone has to be vested in it. Everyone has to be accountable. Everyone has to be aligned. You don't want it with a boat where you've got 8 people on the boat, 3 are going one direction, 5 are going the other. That doesn't work.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense.
Larry, switching gears a little bit, what characteristics do you think are most important to be a strong board member? I'm not referring to specific skills or expertise, but rather attributes that cut across all industries and sectors.
To be a strong board member, first of all, you've got to have that first board experience. because you want to have some experience bringing people onto boards who have had zero board experience. And that experience could be in the nonprofit world, it could be in the profit world, but you've got to have that first experience. Second, you've got to understand this is a role of governance. This is a role of compliance, but this is even more important than governance and compliance. It's really going from being a fiduciary obligation, to delivering enhanced strategic value add that accelerates companies' growth. So I often refer board members, you got to be growth creators. You've got to understand the different risks, but you've got to deliberately debate issues and feel free to do that, to be completely transparent, to be able to ask well-informed questions. I prefer open questions than closed questions in terms of that. You've got to be able to mentor the CEO and the senior management and build a culture of both innovation and accountability.
And Larry, usually being on a board, I would say, is an infrequent collaboration opportunity. You meet once a quarter with your colleagues and other board members. You're not actually working day to day. How does one build that strength, not only in the board, but as you as an individual board member, where despite that infrequent collaboration, you're able to build a working relationship and work towards the goals that a board should be strong at?
First, I back up and define boards, because there are, at one end, completely passive boards where some CEOs or senior management just want them to rubber stamp or meet several times a year. And then you have on the other end, extremely active boards. In order to be close to the other end, the extremely active board, you've got to have committees. So it's not just the 4 times a year, quarterly, that it meets. It's all the committees and the work that gets done. I also believe the CEO has to inform the board monthly, minimum monthly. Now, whether they want to just send out an email or you have an hour-long call, but the board cannot go 3 months without knowing what's happening at the business and then find it out right before the board meeting. I don't think that's good communication-wise, and I don't think that's good for board members to be active board members and find out 3 months ago or 2 months ago something happened.
You know, I want to go back to one thing you said, which is the first thing is you have to have board experience.
Right.
So that's a little bit of a chicken and egg. So obviously you could find someone has great skills, has the right expertise, you think would be great for board culture, but has never sat on a board. So there must be instances in which you select someone for a board who's never been on a board. How do you do that?
Right. So then I would make sure that that person, that board member, had the requisite training. So that would involve, for all board members in general, you have to start with list of expectations. What's expected from me as a board member? Second, they should spend time at the company or at the nonprofit, probably a full day there, where they go through and just find a lot of the history, where the company or where the nonprofit's gone in the past, where it is today, where it's going in the future, what it's made of, what are the committees, what are the roles, what are the responsibilities, the basics. And then I would also encourage they get training outside, whether it's National Association of Corporate Directors or one of the other organizations out there that focus on this. I think this is key, but you're right, because they need the training to be able to walk in.
So I want to ask you, I'm very much in agreement about, well, a number of things you're saying, but creating the correct expectations for a board member and making sure the board member understands what is going to be expected of him or her, I think is absolutely critical. And I think it often doesn't happen.
Right.
What are the expectations that you communicate to a board member when you're involved in that process?
It varies very much by the board, and if you're talking nonprofit versus profit, but expectations can be everything from this is the time commitment we're talking about, so they know that up front. We're going to have quarterly meetings, so that's 4 times a year. How long do they last? Do they last 2 hours? Do they last 4 hours? Are they a full day? We're going to have committee meetings. We expect you to serve on at least 1 or 2 committees, whatever it is. Governance committee, compensation committee, audit committee, wherever their specialty lies for them to be serving on this committee. That meets X number of times. So all those expectations. It could also be you want any company documents they have. These are the rules. These are regulations. So they understand things and any compliance things. Audits that occur, how often they occur. So it's a lot of the information, knowing it up front, and then in terms of your role on the board, explaining that, how board meetings are run, and what role we want you to do. Because if you're trying to get them to be growth creators, you want them to feel free to ask any question they want in a board meeting.
Do you spend much time really making sure they understand that they need to do their homework in advance of a board meeting, that the meeting is not going to be a lot of presentations where they're going to learn, that the learning, most of it should be done prior to the meeting itself?
I'm a huge fan of being informed before you walk in the boardroom. So that requires a couple things. From the CEO or management team, all board materials must be sent out at least 5 days in advance. They shouldn't arrive to the board member 1 day in advance. Second, you have all the committee meetings you've been part of. So hopefully you've gained a lot of knowledge being part of those active members of those committees. But you should never, ever have a board member who sits in on a board meeting and starts to go through all the presentations for the first time. That should never happen. Now, in terms of what you're talking about, the PowerPoint presentations, get them in advance, have the board read them, and then you can focus on key issues or questions, period. Not the dog and pony shows. Do not waste or spend time. And we've done actually a lot of analysis of this, because what it comes down to is a number of boards and board meetings are not very strategic at all. So if you say over half the meeting should be spent or allocated on strategy and long-term strategy, real issues, that's not what occurs at a lot of board meetings. In fact, very small percentage.
So amen, especially on the issue of sitting in a room and having a fellow board member appearing to look at the stuff for the first time. How aggravating is that, and how really counterproductive is that? That's really not acceptable.
Well, I've also seen where a board member asks a question that was answered if you read the deck, and that is inexcusable.
Speaking of that, this can go pretty far, Larry. So talk about, what do you do as a board member or even chair of the board or board advisor when you realize that there is a board member that is disruptive, counterproductive, or you've made the wrong choice?
It starts with the expectations. You've defined the expectations up front. And by doing that, when you have a board member who's not performing, you can be able to sit down with the board member. And that should typically be 2 people. Often it's the chairperson or chairman of the board, and then the head of the governance committee. Often you've gone through and done a 360 feedback, and you're able to sit down. And then the question is, can the person change or not? So I've been part of a number of these meetings, and some of the people are very receptive and say, I didn't realize I was doing that. And others do not change what they're doing. And if they don't change what they're doing, then you've got to see, are they the right person for the board going forward? You can also look at, well, how long, when does the term end? Because that does make a difference. Because if you're talking about the term's going to end in a month or 2, you may just want to keep them on the board and then just don't reelect them. Now, in those meetings, I find the best way to approach it is to ask them the questions first. Don't just go into judgment day here, but rather say to them, how do you view your performance on the board? Or do you have time to be an effective board member, and hear how they respond? Because often they'll say something else could be going on with them, personal-wise, health-wise. They lost interest. They realize they're not participating the way they should be, or their attention's been diverted to other things.
Yeah, no, important to listen to them. As you said, board members need to listen, and I think that makes sense. I will say this, though, and we've talked about this before, that in my experience, that even when you do it the right way, you make the observation that someone is not appropriate for the board, whether they're disruptive or they're not doing their homework or for whatever other reason. And it's clear that they need to come off the board. My experience is that many owners, CEOs, whoever it is that's really running it, are very reluctant. They don't want that kind of confrontation. Even though it doesn't have to be confrontational, it feels that way to many people. How do you help people kind of get over the concern, oh, if I ask Larry off my board, he's going to be so hurt or he's going to be upset or whatever it may be? Because a lot of it becomes a personal issue. Even though that person may not be a good board member, a lot of owners, senior management don't want to offend them, which I find interesting.
Right, but often those are the same CEOs who don't like to have uncomfortable conversations with their direct reports or employees who aren't performing either. But it is important in addressing these uncomfortable conversations that whoever you're addressing with, you want that board member still leaving with a good impression of the board and the company going forward, because you got to view them no different from employees, as they're still ambassadors for you.
Yes, of course. But there are definitely instances that I've observed, and I'm sure you have too, where no matter what you do, when someone is being off-boarded, they don't like it. You have to be ready for that.
Right. And so to me, it's how it's being done.
I say this all the time. It's really easy to ask someone on the board. It is very difficult to ask them off. So be very careful with that invitation.
I agree with that.
And so taking this to now the board level, Larry, what are 2 or 3 most important attributes for an effective board? What allows them to add value for the company that they serve?
For the board to add value for the company, they need to focus on the success of the company. Where or how do we make this company successful? How can we as board members really focus on the future? Not on yesterday, not on today, but on the future, and making sure that's where the board is spending time. What often happens is the senior management, and I've been CEO of a number of companies, you get so caught up in day to day, it's hard for you to step back and start to look from a 20 or 50,000 foot view. That's what the board needs to do. The other thing the board needs to do is make sure that they're working on the critical few things that are going to make a difference for that business to push it forward. The board cannot be afraid to challenge. There has to be constructive dissent. That said, when a decision is made, even if you don't agree with it as a particular board member, the decision has been made.
So to pick up on constructive dissent, absolutely agree. I mean, I will often say, if you're not going to speak, then you shouldn't really be on the board. But what are the things that go into creating the kind of board culture where board members feel comfortable speaking, even when they know maybe senior management or other board members or the chair doesn't agree with the position?
Trust, transparency, being able to be open, knowing that you're going to have a discussion about it and really be able to openly debate the issues. And everyone, when I say transparency, I mean transparency.
On the topic of transparency, what do you think about the practice of having executive sessions of the board where the CEO steps out and the board meets alone? I know for years that's been something that people have talked about as good governance. I have heard lately maybe some pushback on that, because why should the CEO not hear this? Isn't it better if he can be in the room? Doesn't it create more trust? What do you think about that?
Well, I'm a governing fellow, National Association Corporate Directors, and they say it is best practice, and and I do believe it is best practice. But at the same time, I think that the feedback has to go directly to the CEO after this session. So if you're going to have an executive session, then you need to provide the feedback directly to the CEO. This is what the board is saying. This is some feedback that you need to work on, or we need to work on as a board going forward. I also think it works the other way around. The CEO needs to judge the board. And we've done a number of surveys and been involved with, we ask CEOs, how effective is the board for you? So it's really got to be a two-way relationship. But I don't view because somebody's out of the room versus in the room as they're being excluded. I view it as a board may not want to be one person saying one thing to the CEO. They feel more comfortable saying it to the chair, and then the chair delivers it as the board saying it, if they agree, if they debate.
When the chair delivers the message of whatever it was that was said in executive session, is he or she alone? Should he do it with another board member? What's the best way to do that?
Well, good question. It depends on what's being delivered and how sensitive it is. A number of boards that we advise, the chair will bring in the CEO and just say, these are the 3 or 4 things that we discussed we want to share with you. But if it's something very sensitive, that's a whole different thing. Then I do believe it's better one-on-one or maybe 2 of the board members sitting in with the CEO.
Larry, one other thing we wanted to ask you, a lot of people do want to serve on boards and think that it's something that they want to be involved with more. What would be your advice to people who want to be on boards and serve on boards?
I would say the first thing you need to do is put together a bio that's geared to being on a board, because a number of people have bios that are not geared to being on board. So focus on a bio that's going to appeal to boards. So that bio would include any of your board experience, any of your committee experience too, if you've chaired any committees, but specific to it. So have that, because that's a mistake I see. People just send their general bio and it doesn't even present in any way their experience in it. And second, then target or think about, where would you add value? What type of boards or what type of industries or companies or nonprofits you would want to add value to versus others you may add less value. You know, whether you've got industry knowledge, if that's what they're looking for, whether you've got acquisition experience, maybe they're looking for a lawyer, maybe they're looking for someone M&A, you've got international experience. You've got to make sure that whatever qualities you're bringing to the party, that this is what they'd be looking for. And again, I see those missing pieces where it just doesn't match.
Larry, is there anything else you'd want to talk about in terms of what you think is important about boards?
Yes, I think that areas where they could improve is focusing on the long term versus the short term. I find that a lot of boards are focused very much on short-term initiatives that are happening in the next year as opposed to the long-term, what's going to happen 3, 5, 10 years, and if we're doing the right things for that. I think that as board members, you've got to think and act like an owner, whether you actually own stock or not. I think that's very important. I do believe as a board member, you're accountable, no different than employees are accountable a company. And I do believe in today's day and age that you've got to figure out, do we have the right diversity on boards? And that means diversity meaning women, that means minorities, that means diversity of opinions. Those are better performing boards than the ones that are not diverse. The other thing I would say is you've got to make sure that you have a strong commitment to your employees, to your community, to the vendors, to all the stakeholders, because a lot of people on boards today are constantly talking about the shareholders, which is important, but they also have to consider all the stakeholders. And are they doing the right things? Are they doing the right things for the community? Are they doing the right things for sustainability, for all the bigger issues out there? And then I would also say 360 reviews are critical, that every board should be doing them. A number of boards do not do them, and nor do they do them well. But that's part of being able to do the feedback.
Larry, it's been great speaking with you. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you all for listening to On Boards with our guest, Larry Siff. Take care, Raza.
You too, Joe.